Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, revisiting preseason predictions. What did I get right? What did I get wrong? And where did the Wolves end up compared to where I thought they would be this season? We're going to do it all on the show today. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Wednesday. Happy hump day, everybody. Thank you, first of all, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, the show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms, from Apple to Google, Spotify to Odyssey. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves. Don't forget the T, and at Beecken. That's with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right, today on the show, we're going to do part two of the predictions revisit. If you missed Tuesday's show, basically what we've done this week, Monday, I looked back at the playoff series, the key takeaways from Game 6 specifically on Saturday, and then also the series as a whole, from last Friday night. Then on Tuesday, I looked back at my first round of predictions from before the season, back in October, which were some individual predictions for Timberwolves players, some team predictions in terms of stats. Part two, though, is going to be today, and that's win-loss record, standings, not just the Timberwolves, but as a whole, some of those things. How did I do? And for the most part, pretty happy with it, but I'll also list where I missed and why I think I missed. We'll do that today. Also, if you missed Monday and Tuesday, I talked a little bit about the D'Angelo Russell stuff at the start of the show on Monday, the end of the show Tuesday. The report that's out there, kind of fueled by Mark Stein, the former ESPN reporter who's now an independent, has his own Substack page, talked about how the Timberwolves rival executives believe the Wolves will try and trade D'Angelo Russell this season, or this offseason, excuse me. And I talked about on Monday before that report was out there that I thought the Wolves would try, but I didn't think they'd be able to. There are some folks that think they will be able to. I talked at the end of the show yesterday on Tuesday why I don't think the Wolves will be able to trade D'Lo in his max expiring deal. Even though it's expiring, I don't think they'll be able to trade it very easily this offseason. I think most likely D'Lo's on the team throughout the year. So that's something we'll keep a pulse on in the coming days and weeks and months, really. But go back and listen to my thoughts on that Monday and Tuesday. But today, I really want to spend the day kind of checking back on the preseason predictions. So some of the stuff I touched on Tuesday was the Towns All-NBA prediction, which I was correct on. Ant barely missing the All-Star team in the discussion for injury replacement. That also happened. I had the Timberwolves out of the bottom 10 defensively for the season. That happened. I had them top 12 in the league in team three-point shooting percentage. They finished exactly 12th. The only one that I missed badly on was Malik Beasley getting votes for sixth man. That is not going to happen. I missed on that one. Otherwise, I hit those other five predictions, or I guess other four predictions, just missing the Beasley one. So I feel pretty good about that. Today, we can look at the team predictions that I made. I made 10 over-under predictions on the show before the season, and I also predicted exact win totals for the Northwest Division, and then ultimately the seeding for the Western Conference and the Eastern Conference. We'll just talk about the West. I did all that on this show. So I want to look back at that. First, I'll say before the season, the Lockdown Power Rankings, we did voting as hosts and co-hosts, excuse me, of Locked On NBA podcast. So roughly 40 to 45 people, if you consider all the co-hosts, did a voting for Power Rankings preseason. The Timberwolves finished 21st in the Lockdown Power Rankings, which preseason they were like 27th in ESPN's ranking, like 25th in NBA.com. I ranked the Timberwolves 18th and said I thought they'd finish the season higher. My explanation there is basically power rankings are in the moment. It's not necessarily ceiling of the team. It's sitting here right now. Realistically, could you possibly justify the Timberwolves are a top, whatever? Before the season, nobody would have said the Wolves are a top 15 team in the league. Nobody would have said they're for sure going to make the playoffs. That's what a power ranking is right now. It can't be, extrapolated out in the future. So I had the Wolves 18th and said I thought they'd finish higher. That's exactly what happened. Of course, they finished 15th league wide in terms of record, 14th or 15th. I had them before the season ranked 18th. I also had the example I actually gave on this podcast back in mid-October was the Brooklyn Nets. I had them second or third in my power rankings, but I said I thought they would be worse than that. I thought that they were being overrated, but in the moment because of their roster and what we knew they could be, and before anybody had rolled the ball out and played a game, I thought that they had to be a top 3 team in terms of roster talent. Remember, this is the James Harden Brooklyn Nets with Kevin Durant, a healthy Kevin Durant. And we, at this point, we knew Kyrie Irving, there was some weird stuff happening there, but we didn't know the extent of what would happen. And as it turns out, they were a lot worse than people thought. They still ended up making the playoffs after the play-in and being the 7th seed in the Eastern Conference. But I was correct in my thought at the time that they had a top 3 roster talent, I believe, and I certainly was correct in thinking they'd be worse than that. So the lockdown power rankings had healthy skepticism of the Nets, which made sense. The Timberwolves at 21 was really not a bad ranking. I think the lockdown host did much better, which is not surprising because all of our hosts have a complete pulse on the teams that they're covering. And, we all listen to each other. We do podcasts with each other. We have a pretty good sense of each other's teams, more so than some of the national pundits who just kind of throw together these rankings before the season. So if you go back and look at the preseason rankings, I'm confident they're more accurate than the ESPNs and some of the other websites out there. Okay, what I want to do next is I want to look at my 10 over-unders before the season, including the Timberwolves, grade my over-unders, how close was it, and then also the Northwest Division, the Western Conference as a whole. And I don't know, I think this is a good exercise in accountability for myself, for the listeners, and I feel pretty good about where I ended up with my prognosticating before the season. So we're going to do all that here on the show today. First, though, let's talk about our friends over at Built Bar. Summer is coming, and with summer, you're going to need some food on the go. Built Bars are the perfect snack to take with you on family vacations. Throw them in your bags and your kids' backpacks. Make sure that everyone has a bar so you're fueled for your summer adventures. The best part about Built Bars is that they're healthy and delicious. No more sacrificing delicious food for health. With Built Bar, you can have both. And it's easy. All you have to do is go to built.com and order now. All Built Bars and their puffs are covered in 100% real chocolate. That means that with Built Bar, you can eat healthy and actually enjoy doing it. Built Bar makes sure that there's something for everyone in terms of flavors. Plus, most Built Bars contain only 130 calories, just 4 grams of sugar, just 4 net carbs, but they also have 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar, which usually has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. Go to built.com to get all your favorites: banana cream pie, raspberry, double chocolate, and so many more. They're all delicious, and new flavors are coming out all the time. Check them out at built.com. Go to built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Thanks again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Make sure to go check out the Locked On NBA Big Board with host Rafael Barlow from NBA Draft Junkies and author of the NBA Big Board newsletter. He's joined by Richard Stamen, Sam Ferris, and Leif Thulin, giving fans an in-depth look into the NBA draft, mock draft, player rankings, and of course, big boards. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. And of course, this is the time. Timberwolves fans are largely used to talking about draft, 6-8 weeks before this. But here we are. It's May, and it's really the first time a lot of us have even really considered the draft. So get caught up with the Locked On NBA Big Board. We'll start talking more draft here as the weeks go on. We're only about 7 or so weeks out from the NBA draft in June. So all of that is upcoming. Okay, let's talk more preseason predictions and accountability to where we ended up here. So I did 10 over-under predictions before the season. I just picked my 10 favorites, and I only had 4 of them wrong, actually. I take that back. I had 4 of them wrong. I got 6 right. A couple of them were really bad misses. I had the Bulls under, and obviously Chicago got off to a great start to the season. It was pretty disappointing the latter half of the season. I had them as a hard under on I think it was 43.5 wins, and they ended up with 46 wins. I thought they'd be right around 40 wins, and I missed that one badly. I got the Bulls wrong. I also got the Bucks wrong. I had Bucks over, and I don't that was a pretty high total. Had them over. I think they were like 55 wins. I had them over. I thought they'd win like 60 games. They only won 51 games. So I missed that one pretty badly as well. My worst miss was the Atlanta Hawks. The Hawks were at 47.5. I took the over. They only won 43 games, and it took a late season push for them to even be in that play-in conversation. They started the year horribly, just like they did the prior season when, of course, they ended up firing their coach, ended up in the Eastern Conference Finals. But I missed that one as well. So I missed the Bucks over. I missed the Bulls under. I missed the Hawks over. The only other one I missed was I had the Hornets as under 38.5 wins. I said that they would be a disappointing team this year. They would disappoint people quite a bit after making the playoffs the year before, would be under 38.5. They ended up winning 43 games, but they were the 10 seed in the Eastern Conference behind a surprising Cavs team. Some folks were surprised about the Raptors. I wasn't. More on that in a minute. So certainly I was right about them being disappointing, but I thought they'd only win 36 or so games. They ended up winning 43. So I missed the Hornets pretty badly as well. So those are the four I missed. The other ones, though, I nailed them. I picked the Grizzlies over 41.5. I thought they'd be mid to high 40s in wins. I think I said 44, 45 wins. Of course, they ended up winning 56. They were way better than even I expected. But the point that I underscored in this predictions podcast was Jaren Jackson Jr. finally being healthy. He's a lot better than people realize. I mean, don't be fooled by the series against the Wolves. He had a miserable series against Minnesota, but he was fantastic. There's a reason he got Defensive Player of the Year votes this year. It was in that conversation. He was phenomenal. So I had the Grizzlies over. I got that one. I also had Raptors over. That was an easy one. I got that one by almost 12 wins. They were 36.5 was the line. Had them over. They won 48 games this year. I had Wizards over. I barely got that one. I had them over 34.5. I thought they'd win 37, 38 games. They ended up only winning 35. So I got it by a half win, but I got that over. I also picked Rockets under 26.5. They got to 20 wins this season only. Not a surprise. Jalen Green was fun, but not, rookies generally aren't good, and no surprise he wasn't. The John Wall situation kind of hung over them early this season. That got resolved somewhat. The Rockets weren't desperately trying to win games necessarily. So it got that under. And then my last one was Timberwolves over. I had them over 35.5. And by the way, betonline.net had them at 35.5, which was higher than a lot of other books. And I still took the over. I thought that they would win significantly more than that. And they ended up winning 46 games this year, beating even my expectations. We'll get to what I thought they would do here in just a minute. But I had relatively tempered expectations at this point preseason about the Wolves. I thought they'd be barely over 500. I know that I talked at one point about them getting into the mid 40s. I thought the best case scenario was probably like a 46, 47 win season. I think I said on the first prediction podcast, I said that the best case scenario could be a 46 to 48 win season. Towns could be second team all NBA. The Wolves get the 6th seed. Well, they ended up with 47 wins, right in that range. They got the 7th seed, and Towns is likely going to be all NBA 3rd team. So my best case scenario, other than the Towns thing and I guess the seeding, they're right in line with what I thought was best case for the season, which feels pretty good. That's not what I ultimately predicted. Like my official submitted prediction that I announced on the podcast, we'll get to in a second, as well as the Western Conference breakdown. And then we'll talk a little bit about what we're going to do here moving forward on the show over the next several weeks. So we're going to do all of that here next. All right, let's talk about the Northwest Division. So before the season, I had the Timberwolves finishing 4th in the Northwest Division, actually. I did have the order almost correct in the division. I was pretty off on one team. So I had the Jazz winning the division. I had them winning 54 games. I thought they'd have a shot at winning the conference. That was not correct. The Jazz were obviously very disappointing and also losing in the first round of the playoffs to Dallas. They ended up only winning 49 games. So I was off on 5 wins, but I did have them in first in the division. I was correct there. I absolutely nailed the Denver Nuggets. I had them at 48 wins. They won exactly 48 games. They were 48 and 34 this season, which was what my prediction was. I had them second in the division. I think most people thought that Jamal Murray and I guess at the time Michael Porter Jr. was mostly healthy. I think most people thought, including myself, Jamal Murray would come back later in the season. That didn't happen. Obviously, the Porter Jr. injury happened early in the season, and Jokic was phenomenal. I think Jokic was repeated basically his MVP performance from a year ago. And that combined with really great coaching by Michael Malone, this team overachieved based on who is available for them. But either way, I nailed the 48 wins and had them second in the division. So I got that one. I did have Portland winning 43 games, edging out the Timberwolves for 3rd in the division. That was way off. They only won 27 games. That would have been easily my worst projection. Of course, Portland finished the season on an 11-game losing streak, and things didn't have to get that ugly. They were roughly 500 when Damian Lillard, or I guess just a little under 500 when Lillard went down initially in like early December, late November, around Thanksgiving, I believe. And at the time, it really looked like them and the Wolves would kind of battle it out for a third in the division, and somewhere in the 6 to 8 range in the Western Conference. But things went wrong. It went sideways in a hurry for Portland. They shed some pieces at the trade deadline, and they ended up third to last in the West and sixth to last in the entire NBA with just 27 wins. So I missed that one pretty badly. I had the Timberwolves fourth in the division. I had them at 42-40, just one game behind Portland. Of course, the Wolves beat that by 4 games. Although before the season, I think a 42-win projection would be much more optimistic than most folks. And I was pretty bullish on them being above 500 this season. And again, I thought best case was 46-48 wins. They won 46 games. So I guess a minute ago I said they won 47. They won 46 games, and feel pretty good about the prediction for them to win 42 and make the playoffs, which we'll get to in a second. Had Oklahoma City at 22-60. The Thunder beat that by 2 games, which, by the way, the Thunder, I think that still would have been over their over-under, if I'm not mistaken. They beat that by a couple of games and ended up winning 24 games this season, 24-58. So I had the order almost correct, just flipped the Wolves in Portland. I had Denver's win total exactly. I had the Jazz a little too optimistic on the Jazz and just a little pessimistic on Oklahoma City and the Timberwolves. My Western Conference predictions for the playoffs. I don't know. This wasn't great. But I don't think very many people would have had, like, for instance, the Lakers out of the playoffs entirely, the Clippers down at 9, Golden State up at 3, Memphis up at 2, or Utah down at 5. I think those things would have surprised most people. Here's what I had. I had Utah getting the number 1 seed. Of course, they ended up finishing 5th in the West and were disappointing in the playoffs. I had Phoenix with the 2 seed. Of course, Phoenix finished with the 1 and won probably 10 more games than I expected them to. Denver I had at 3. Denver finished 6th. I had the Mavs at 4. The Mavs did finish 4th, so I had that one right. I had the Lakers at 5th. Not correct. The Lakers finished 11th. They did only miss the play-in by a game, but I had them 5th. They finished 11th. I had the Clippers 6th. They finished 9th. I said that the Memphis Grizzlies would surprise people and make a run at the 6th seed in the Western Conference, but I did not think that they would be as good as they were, and I had them 7th. They ended up finishing, of course, 2nd with a 56-26 record. I had Portland 8th and the Timberwolves 9th in the West, and then I had Golden State way down at 10th. I thought depth would be an issue for them, but Klay Thompson came back better and healthier, I think, than I expected. And some of those depth pieces, I mean, they started the year so hot. Steph Curry was so good the first couple months of the season that they were able to weather his injury later in the year and some of the other issues they had. And their depth was good enough. I mean, they only beat the Mavs by a game for the 3 spot, but I had them all the way down at 10. So I missed badly on Golden State. I did have the team, I knew the Thunder would be the second worst team. I knew the Rockets would be the worst team. I knew the Kings would definitely be worse than the Wolves. And I was also a little bit more pessimistic on New Orleans, even assuming Zion Williamson would come back at some point. I thought they would be worse than they were. Of course, the CJ McCollum trade worked well for them. And obviously, Brandon Ingram, I think, maybe played a little better than I expected. I messed up the Eastern Conference pretty badly. I'm not gonna go in depth on it too much. I did have Miami and Milwaukee and Philadelphia in the top 4, and they did all finish in the top 4. I was way more optimistic on Atlanta than I should have been. I don't think anyone had Cleveland as a winning team. I had them down 3rd worst in the conference. I also had the Pacers in the play-in. I had the Wizards in the play-in. They both missed. And then I had Boston a little bit worse than they were. So I was much better in the West, I think, than the East. But generally speaking, my biggest misses were Atlanta, being much, much worse than I expected them to be. The Lakers being much worse than I expected them to be. And those would probably be the biggest ones. Maybe Utah being worse than I expected. Outside of that, I feel like I did pretty good in terms of over-unders and rankings, conference rankings, standings, and all that good stuff. So not all that bad. And this is an exercise, of course, we're going to continue. As we get closer to the draft, I do want to do we'll certainly do a Locked On NBA mock draft with some other Locked On hosts. We'll do some co-hosted podcasts, some crossovers where we'll each take some picks and predict who's going to get drafted. I'll likely have somebody from the NBA Big Board show on the show here to discuss the Timberwolves pick. Of course, the Wolves will not be picking the lottery for the first time in a while. So that'll be kind of the next thing. And I'll have some predictions there in terms of draft. And then we'll look ahead to the offseason. I mean, there's plenty coming up here in the next few weeks. We'll also keep tabs on the playoffs. As I'm recording this, Golden State and Memphis are playing in game 2. Of course, Golden State held on to win game 1. So we'll definitely, keep tabs on that as well. With a lot of, already Jaren Jackson Jr. is having a much more successful series against Golden State than he did against Minnesota. So we'll see how that all shakes out. And also Boston beat Milwaukee as well on Tuesday. So Boston has now tied that series 1-1, with both of those games being fairly easy wins for the victorious team. So the rest of this week, we're going to get into some player reviews. I think that's the next step here before we get into some draft stuff. We'll of course keep tabs on any news surrounding the Wolves. There's nothing besides the D'Lo chatter really out there at this point. So stay tuned in case anything changes, and stay tuned as we go through player reviews here moving forward. That's all we have for you today. Thanks again for listening to the Locked On Wolves podcast. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and thank you for making us your first listen every day. Of course, the show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, Odyssey. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T Wolves and at Beecken. That's with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. And as long as you're making us your first listen, please consider your second listen to be Locked On NBA. Locked On NBA is fantastic. There's different hosts and co-hosts each day of the week, Monday through Friday, from the first jump ball, the play-in tournament from a couple of weeks ago, to the last possession of the finals coming up in June. Locked On experts take you deep inside the playoffs with insight and analysis affecting all 30 teams. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.